What kind of circus act is this? Sergeant Torres's voice cracked with disbelief as he gestured toward the rifle resting on the shooting bench. The weapon's bright cobalt blue coating seemed to mock everything the Marine Corps stood for: precision, seriousness, lethality. Marcus Williams, 81 years carved into weathered hands and patient eyes, didn't flinch. His stillness was unnatural, a reservoir of discipline so deep it unnerved the younger Marines more than any argument could. The custom rifle, its blue paint job like a child's toy, drew snickers from the group of combat-hardened snipers. "Sir, that thing doesn't belong on a military range," Torres continued, his authority inflating with each word. "We're conducting advanced long-range training. 4,000 meters. Multi-million-dollar sensor equipment." Marcus's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around a worn compass pendant hanging beneath his shirt. The blue wasn't a joke. It was survival. It was so they could find him against the sky. Private Martinez reached out to poke the rifle stock. "Feels like cheap plastic." That's when the convoy appeared on the horizon, dust clouds billowing, engines roaring with desperate urgency. Someone was coming. Someone who knew exactly what that blue rifle meant. Before we continue, if you've ever been underestimated because of your age, type "respect" below. And tell me where you're watching from. This story of Marcus Williams proves that true legends hide in plain sight. I read every comment. The morning had started like any other at the Marine Corps long-range facility in 29 Palms. The desert air shimmered with heat waves that made the distant mountains dance like mirages. But this wasn't just another training day. 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines were conducting their final sniper qualification, a grueling test that separated the elite from the merely good. Marcus Williams had arrived at 5:30, before the Marines, before the heat, before the questions. He moved with the economy of motion that comes from 8 decades of purposeful living. His canvas bag contained nothing flashy, just the essentials a marksman needs. And the rifle that now drew stares and whispers from America's finest. "Look at this guy," Private Martinez had whispered to his squad leader. "Probably thinks he's some kind of weekend warrior." Sergeant Torres, a decorated combat veteran with 3 tours under his belt, felt his patience evaporating. He'd worked too hard to earn his position as section leader to let some civilian grandfather turn his range into a sideshow. The old man's credentials checked out. His base access was legitimate. His range fees paid. But that didn't mean he belonged here. Not with that garish blue rifle that looked like it belonged in a toy store rather than a precision shooting competition. "Sir," Torres had tried diplomacy first, "this range is reserved for military personnel conducting advanced training. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the civilian facility down the road." Marcus Williams had looked up then, his pale blue eyes meeting Torres's gaze with a steady calmness that felt like being evaluated by a computer. He hadn't spoken, hadn't argued, had simply returned his attention to his rifle, performing his pre-shooting routine with methodical precision. That silence felt like defiance. It felt like disrespect. "Did you hear me, old man?" Torres's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby shooting positions. "I said this range is for military personnel only." Still nothing. The old man continued his preparations, checking and rechecking his rifle's zero, testing the wind direction with a wetted finger raised to the morning breeze. Private Martinez snorted. Maybe his hearing aid is broken. That got a laugh from the other Marines. Young men, all of them. Confident in their abilities, proud of their service, convinced that their youth and training made them superior to this aged civilian who didn't know his place. They had no idea they were about to learn the most important lesson of their military careers. Marcus Williams completed his rifle inspection, the blue weapon's unusual appearance contrasting sharply with the olive drabs and desert tans surrounding him. He knew what they were thinking. He knew what they saw. An old man playing soldier, a relic from a forgotten era. What they didn't see was the ghost of 47 confirmed kills. What they didn't recognize was the prototype of the very weapon systems they carried. What they couldn't imagine was that this quiet civilian had helped write the book on everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. The convoy was getting closer. The confrontation was drawing an audience. Word had spread across the range that some old-timer was causing problems for the Marine sniper section. Shooters from other positions stopped their own training to watch the drama unfold. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the range's assistant safety officer, approached the group. A career Marine with 22 years of service, he'd seen his share of ego conflicts. Usually a quick word from a senior NCO resolved these situations. "What's the situation here, Torres?" Rodriguez asked, noting the tension in his subordinate's stance. "Civilian refuses to comply with range protocol, Staff Sergeant. I've asked him multiple times to relocate to an appropriate facility." Rodriguez studied Marcus Williams, taking in the man's posture, the quality of his equipment, the professional manner in which he'd arranged his shooting position. Something felt off about this situation. The old man didn't carry himself like a weekend hobbyist. "Sir," Rodriguez addressed Marcus directly, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Range Safety Officer. Is there some misunderstanding about today's training schedule?" For the first time, Marcus Williams spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled with the slight rasp of age. "No misunderstanding, Staff Sergeant. I have proper authorization to be here." He produced his documentation without drama, without defensiveness. Base access card, range reservation confirmation, insurance papers, everything in perfect order. Rodriguez examined the papers carefully. The name meant nothing to him, but something about the man's bearing triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. There was something familiar about that unnatural stillness, that economy of motion. "Authorization appears to be in order," Rodriguez announced, handing the papers back. "What seems to be the problem with the gentleman's presence here?" Torres pointed at the blue rifle. "That weapon, Staff Sergeant. It's inappropriate for a military facility. It's distracting to our Marines during their final qualification." Rodriguez looked at the rifle more carefully. The blue coating was certainly unusual, but the weapon itself showed signs of sophisticated engineering. The stock was custom-fitted, the scope mount precision-machined, the barrel obviously hand-selected for accuracy. "What kind of rifle is it, sir?" Rodriguez asked Marcus. "Custom build," Marcus replied simply. "Based on a prototype I developed some years ago." Private Martinez couldn't contain himself. "Prototype? You mean like a hobby project?" Marcus Williams turned his attention to the young Marine for the first time. The old man's gaze was steady, evaluative, but not unkind. "Something like that, son." But Martinez was emboldened by what he interpreted as the old man's evasiveness. "I mean, with respect, sir, but that thing looks like something you'd find at a paintball park. We're training with actual military weapons here, state-of-the-art systems." He gestured to his own rifle, a precision instrument worth more than most people's cars. "This is an M40A6, sir. Military precision at its finest. 750-meter effective range, sub-MOA accuracy." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Fine weapon. I'm familiar with it." "Familiar with it?" Torres joined the conversation, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate the gap between this civilian's knowledge and their professional expertise. "Sir, no disrespect, but this is current-generation military hardware. These systems are classified, restricted technology. The M40A6 is based on the Remington 700 action," Marcus said quietly. "Macmillan A4 stock, Schneider barrel, Schmidt and Bender optics. Effective range closer to 800 meters in the right hands." The Marines exchanged glances. The old man knew his specifications, but any gun enthusiast with internet access could memorize technical data. "Knowing specs is different from knowing how to use them," Torres pressed. "These weapons require years of training, constant practice. They're not sporting goods." Marcus Williams's expression didn't change. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant. They require training." Across the range, Master Sergeant Chen watched the confrontation with growing unease. A 30-year Marine veteran, he recognized something in the old man's bearing that the younger Marines missed. The way he sat, the way he breathed, the way his eyes tracked wind patterns while maintaining casual conversation. Chen had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. He'd worked with special operations units, intelligence assets, contractors whose names never appeared in official records. and something about Marcus Williams felt familiar in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. But what really caught his attention was the gradual shift in the other observers. The initial amusement was fading, replaced by something else: curiosity, then doubt. The old man's quiet competence was beginning to register with the more experienced Marines present. Gunnery Sergeant Miller, the senior range safety officer, emerged from the tower office. He'd been monitoring radio traffic when he noticed the commotion. As he approached, his eyes fell on the blue rifle, and he stopped dead in his tracks. That color, that specific shade of blue. His blood ran cold. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and dialed a number he rarely used, but had never forgotten. "Colonel Harrison, this is Gunny Miller at 29 Palms. I need you to run a name through the system. Highest classification level you can access. The name is Marcus Williams." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Gunny," the colonel's voice was tight. "Where exactly is this Marcus Williams right now?" Miller looked across the range at the quiet confrontation still unfolding. The young Marines had no idea what storm was about to break over them. "He's on my range, sir, and he's got the blue rifle with him." The silence on the phone lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Colonel Harrison's voice cut through like a blade. "Nobody moves. Nobody approaches that man. I'm making a call right now that's going to change everything. The cavalry is coming, Gunny, and they're coming fast." What nobody knew was that Marcus Williams could hear every word. 40 years in covert operations had given him hearing like a hawk and instincts like a predator. He knew the phone calls were being made. He knew the wheels were turning. He also knew that these young Marines, brave, dedicated, but woefully ignorant, were about to get the education of their lives. The blue rifle wasn't just painted that color for camouflage against the sky. It was a beacon, a signal, a calling card that had once meant the difference between victory and defeat in places where America officially had no presence. And now, after 30 years of retirement, that beacon was about to shine again. The tension on the range had shifted like a change in barometric pressure. What had started as casual mockery was evolving into something more complex. The experienced NCOs were beginning to sense that this situation was not what it appeared. Corporal Jenkins, a sniper instructor with 4 deployments under his belt, approached the group with careful steps. He'd been observing from his teaching position and noticed details that the younger Marines had missed. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Jenkins said quietly. "Permission to speak?" "Go ahead, Corporal." Jenkins gestured toward Marcus Williams with professional respect. "Sir, I've been watching this gentleman's preparation routine. His positioning, his equipment check, his wind-reading techniques." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This isn't amateur hour. This is textbook precision shooting protocol, advanced level." Torres scoffed. "Anyone can read a manual, Jenkins." "No, sir," Jenkins replied firmly. "Anyone can memorize steps, but muscle memory like that, the unconscious competence I'm observing, that takes decades to develop." As if to prove Jenkins' point, Marcus Williams made a subtle adjustment to his rifle's bipod legs, correcting for a ground slope so slight it was barely visible. The movement was automatic, instinctive, the kind of micro-adjustment that came from thousands of shots taken in dozens of different environments. "See that?" Jenkins whispered. "He's compensating for a cant that most shooters wouldn't even notice." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was beginning to feel the first stirrings of doubt about the situation. He'd been in the Corps long enough to recognize real expertise when he saw it, regardless of age or appearance. "Sir," Rodriguez addressed Marcus, "if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn to shoot?" Marcus looked up from his preparation, his pale eyes studying Rodriguez's face. There was a moment of evaluation, as if he were deciding how much truth to reveal. "Started young," Marcus said finally. "Had some good teachers along the way." It was a non-answer that somehow revealed everything, the kind of careful response that suggested classified history, compartmentalized operations, stories that couldn't be told. Private Martinez, still skeptical but less certain than before, pointed at the blue rifle. "But why that color?" I mean, if you're serious about shooting, why make your weapon look like a toy? For the first time, Marcus Williams smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. It was the kind of smile a man wears when remembering something that happened long ago in a place far away. Color served a purpose, he said simply. Made it easy to spot from the air. The implications of that statement hit the more experienced Marines like a physical blow. Easy to spot from the air meant extraction scenarios. It meant operations where being found quickly was the difference between rescue and being left behind. Gunnery Sergeant Miller ended his phone call and walked toward the group with purposeful strides. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Miller called out. "I need to speak with you, privately, right now." Rodriguez followed Miller a few steps away from the group, close enough that Marcus Williams could still hear their conversation if he chose to listen. "Staff Sergeant," Miller's voice was low and urgent. "I just got off the phone with Colonel Harrison at Division. That man," he nodded toward Marcus, "that name came back flagged at levels I didn't know existed." "What kind of flags, Gunny?" "The kind that make colonels stop what they're doing and make phone calls to generals. The kind that get convoy responses authorized in under 5 minutes. Miller looked back at Marcus Williams, who continued his preparations as if nothing had changed. "The kind that suggest we have been making a very serious mistake." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. "How serious?" "The colonel used words like legend and ghost and 40-year classification hold." Miller paused. "Staff Sergeant, I think we've been disrespecting someone who could probably teach our entire battalion things they've never dreamed of." Across the range, the sound of approaching vehicles was growing louder. Not just 1 or 2 cars. This sounded like a full convoy moving at emergency speed. Torres, who had been watching this whispered conversation with growing irritation, finally lost patience. "What's all the secret squirrel stuff about? He's just some old civilian with a weird rifle." That's when Marcus Williams stood up. The movement was fluid, economical, but there was something about it that commanded immediate attention. He turned to face Torres directly, and for the first time, the full weight of his attention was focused on the young sergeant. "Son," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the range, "I appreciate your dedication to your Marines and your mission. But you might want to consider the possibility that there are things in this world you don't know yet." The words were spoken without anger, without defensiveness, but with an absolute certainty that made every Marine present suddenly very aware that they might be in over their heads. Private Martinez, trying to salvage some authority from the situation, reached out toward the blue rifle again. "I still think it looks like—" "Don't touch the weapon." The words came from Marcus Williams with the kind of authority that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to military conditioning. Every Marine on the range froze. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command issued by someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question. And in that moment, even the youngest Marines began to suspect that they might have made a terrible mistake. The convoy was less than a minute out. The sound of approaching vehicles had every Marine on the range turning toward the access road. This wasn't normal traffic. Multiple engines, heavy vehicles, moving fast enough to kick up dust clouds visible from miles away. Master Sergeant Chen finished his own phone call and approached Gunnery Sergeant Miller with urgency written across his face. "Gunny," Chen said, keeping his voice low but his words carrying weight, "I just spoke with someone at SOCOM who knew that name. What he told me—" Chen shook his head. "We need to stop this confrontation, right now." Miller looked at the group of Marines still positioned around Marcus Williams, who continued his methodical preparation as if the approaching convoy was of no concern to him. "What did they tell you?" Miller asked. "Enough to know that man isn't just a veteran, he's a ghost story come to life." Chen paused, watching Marcus make another micro-adjustment to his rifle scope. "The person I spoke with said there are mission reports from the 80s and 90s that are still classified at the highest levels. Reports that mention a contractor who operated alone in places we officially never were." Torres, overhearing fragments of the conversation, felt his confusion growing into frustration. "What's everyone whispering about? The old man has papers, fine. That doesn't mean he gets to disrupt our training with his hobby rifle." That's when Marcus Williams spoke without turning around, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he'd been listening to every word. "Sergeant Torres," Marcus said, "what do you know about Operation Distant Thunder?" Torres exchanged glances with his Marines. "Never heard of it, sir." "Good," Marcus replied. "You shouldn't have. It was classified above your pay grade before you were born." He continued working on his rifle, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. 63 days in the mountains of a country that doesn't officially exist on our deployment records. 7 confirmed high-value targets eliminated at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters. The Marines around him had gone completely silent. The blue rifle was painted that color because extraction came by helicopter, sky blue against mountain peaks. Made it possible for our people to find me when the mission was complete. Private Martinez, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, managed to whisper, You were a sniper?" Marcus finally turned around and his pale blue eyes met Martinez's gaze. "Son, I wrote the manual your instructors used to teach sniper tactics. The breathing techniques, the wind reading, the mathematics of long-range ballistics. Half of what you think you know came from reports I filed 30 years ago." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez felt the ground shifting beneath his understanding of the situation. "Sir, if that's true, why didn't you say something when this confrontation started?" Marcus Williams's expression softened slightly. "Because these young Marines needed to learn something more important than my history. They needed to learn that assumptions can be dangerous." The convoy sound was getting much closer now, close enough to make out individual vehicle engines. Corporal Jenkins, the sniper instructor, stepped forward with newfound respect. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of ranges were you working at back then?" "The rifle you're looking at," Marcus said, patting the blue weapon gently, "was zeroed for 3,200 meters, but I had to push it further when circumstances required." The number hit the Marines like a physical blow. 3,200 meters was beyond the effective range of most modern military sniper systems. "That's impossible," Martinez whispered. Marcus smiled again, that same distant expression that spoke of memories from another lifetime. "Son, impossible is just another word for something you haven't figured out yet." He returned his attention to his rifle, making final adjustments with the kind of practiced precision that comes from thousands of repetitions. "The blue paint served another purpose too," he said conversationally. "In Arctic environments, it provided perfect camouflage against ice and sky. I spent 47 days in conditions that would kill most people, waiting for one shot at a target that could have changed the course of a war." Torres, his authority completely undermined but his curiosity overwhelming his ego, asked, "Did you make the shot?" Marcus Williams looked up at him with eyes that had seen things no training manual could prepare someone for. "The war ended 3 days early," he said simply. "That's when the first vehicle of the convoy came into view. A black SUV moving fast enough to be classified as reckless, followed by what looked like half a dozen official vehicles." Gunnery Sergeant Miller checked his watch and realized that less than 10 minutes had passed since he'd made his phone call. For a military bureaucracy, this response time was unprecedented. "Gentlemen," Miller announced to the assembled Marines, "I think we're about to meet some people who can tell us exactly who Marcus Williams is." Marcus continued his preparation routine, but now there was something different in his posture. A readiness, an alertness that suggested he knew exactly what was coming and was prepared for it. 30 years, he said, more to himself than to the Marines around him. 30 years of quiet retirement, and it all comes back because of one training exercise. The convoy was entering the range facility now, vehicles spreading out in a formation that spoke of serious security protocols. And Marcus Williams, the man they had dismissed as a civilian with a toy rifle, calmly made his final sight adjustments and prepared to demonstrate exactly what 3 decades of classified operations had taught him about precision shooting. The ghost was about to become visible. The convoy didn't just arrive, it descended like a controlled avalanche. 6 black SUVs, 2 military Humvees, and a command vehicle that looked like it belonged in a war zone rather than a training facility. Every Marine on the range stopped what they were doing to watch the vehicles deploy with military precision. Doors opened in synchronized choreography, and figures emerged with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested this was not a routine visit. From the lead SUV stepped a woman in an immaculate marine dress blue uniform. The eagles on her collar caught the desert sunlight, a full kernel. But it was the figure who emerged from the passenger side of the second vehicle that caused every jaw on the range to drop. Brigadier General Patricia Hayes stepped onto the dirt, her single star gleaming, her face set in an expression that could have been carved from granite. She was a legend herself, the first female Marine to command a special operations unit, a woman whose combat record was the stuff of Marine Corps mythology. But it was what happened next that would be burned into the memory of every Marine present for the rest of their lives. General Hayes ignored everyone else on the range. Her attention was focused entirely on the quiet figure of Marcus Williams, who had risen from his shooting position and now stood beside his blue rifle with the same unnatural stillness that had unnerved the Marines all morning. The general walked directly toward him, her stride powerful and purposeful. The entire range had fallen silent except for the sound of her boots on the gravel and the settling engines of the convoy. She stopped directly in front of Marcus Williams. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then General Hayes brought her heels together with a sharp crack and rendered the crispest, most respectful salute Torres had ever witnessed. It wasn't the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a warrior gives to a living legend. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice clear and strong enough to carry across the silent range. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the conduct of my Marines. They had no idea who they were addressing." She held the salute, waiting. Marcus Williams slowly, gracefully returned the salute. It was perfect in its execution, shoulders square, hand positioned with precision that spoke of decades of military bearing. Only then did General Hayes lower her hand. She turned to face Sergeant Torres, and the warmth in her eyes was replaced by glacial fury. "Sergeant Torres," she began, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who this man is?" Torres, pale and trembling, could barely find his voice. "No, ma'am. He's a civilian, ma'am. A civilian." General Hayes let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sergeant, you and your Marines have been standing in the presence of a man who helped shape modern special operations doctrine. You've been disrespecting someone whose classified service record reads like a legend that most people would assume was fiction." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "This is Marcus Williams. Some of you may have heard whispers about the ghost of the mountains. This is him, standing right here." The silence on the range was absolute, thick with shock and dawning horror at what they had done. General Hayes continued, her voice rising with each word. "This man holds the highest civilian awards for valor our country can bestow. He served as a special projects consultant for classified operations spanning 4 decades. He is personally credited with 17 confirmed eliminations at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. She gestured toward the blue rifle. "And that weapon you've been mocking? That is the prototype for the XM 2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle System that half of you have strapped to your backs. Except his is better because he built it by hand in a forward operating base with salvaged materials. Private Martinez looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. The blue paint you found so amusing," General Hayes continued, "that was so medevac helicopters could locate his position for extraction after he spent 6 days alone behind enemy lines, protecting a downed pilot while an entire enemy battalion searched for them both." She turned back to Marcus Williams. "That pilot, by the way, went on to become a 4-star general. General Morrison credits Mr. Williams with saving not just his life, but the lives of everyone in his crew." The magnitude of their mistake was crashing over the Marines like a tsunami. They had not just disrespected a veteran, they had mocked a living legend, a man whose actions had quite literally changed military history. Torres's legs felt weak. "Ma'am, we had no way of knowing." "No way of knowing." General Hayes's voice cracked like a whip. "You had no way of knowing because you assumed. You saw an elderly man with an unusual weapon and decided he was beneath your notice. You saw apparent weakness where you should have recognized quiet strength. She pointed directly at Torres. You and every Marine involved in this incident will report to my office tomorrow morning at 500. You're going to receive a comprehensive education in respect, humility, and the recognition that heroes don't always announce themselves. Marcus Williams, who had remained silent through this devastating revelation, finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, without a trace of anger or vindication. "General," he said quietly, "they're young. They're proud. That's not necessarily a bad thing." He looked at the assembled Marines with eyes that had seen things they couldn't imagine. They just need to learn that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you notice least. The education of Sergeant Torres and his Marines was far from over. But the first, most important lesson had been delivered with devastating clarity. Never assume you know who you're dealing with. The ghost had revealed himself, and nothing would ever be the same. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. General Hayes was true to her word, but her justice came with unexpected mercy, tempered by Marcus Williams's quiet intervention. Instead of the career-ending punishment Torres and his Marines had expected, they found themselves enrolled in what became known as the Williams Protocol, a month-long intensive training program that combined Marine Corps history, veteran recognition procedures, and advanced marksmanship instruction. But it wasn't taught in classrooms. It was taught through experience. For the first week, Torres and his squad spent their days maintaining the base's memorial gardens and their evenings writing detailed reports on Medal of Honor recipients, focusing specifically on those whose service had been classified or unrecognized during their lifetimes. "You want to understand what you did wrong," Gunnery Sergeant Miller explained during their first day of remedial duty. "You need to understand how many heroes walk among us every day, invisible because people like you assume they know what heroism looks like." The second week brought them face to face with other veterans whose service had been overlooked or minimized. A soft-spoken janitor who had served as a Navy SEAL, a cafeteria worker who had been a combat medic in Vietnam, a groundskeeper who had received the Silver Star for actions in Somalia. "Every person you meet," Marcus Williams told them during one of his voluntary mentoring sessions, "has a story. Most of them are deeper than you imagine. The wise learn to listen before they judge." But it was the third week that truly changed everything. Marcus Williams offered to provide advanced marksmanship training to Torres and his Marines, not as punishment, but as education. The sessions took place at dawn when the range was empty and the desert air was still cool. "The rifle you mocked," Marcus explained, setting up his blue weapon on the bench, "was designed for scenarios where failure meant death. Not just my death, but the death of people depending on me to make impossible shots under impossible circumstances." He demonstrated techniques that weren't in any manual, shared knowledge that had been earned through decades of operations that officially never happened. "Breathing is everything," he told them, his voice patient as he worked with Martinez on proper respiratory control. "But it's not just about holding your breath. It's about finding the space between heartbeats where your body is perfectly still." Torres, humbled beyond recognition, asked during one session, "Sir, how do you forgive us? We were so wrong about you, so disrespectful." Marcus paused in his instruction and looked at the young sergeant with those pale blue eyes that had seen so much. "Son, being wrong isn't a character flaw. It's a learning opportunity. The problem isn't that you made assumptions, it's that you acted on them without gathering more information." He gestured toward the distant targets. "In my line of work, assumptions got people killed. I learned early to observe, assess, and verify before making any judgments." Private Martinez, who had shown the most improvement during the training, worked up the courage to ask the question they all wanted answered. "Sir, will you show us what that rifle can really do?" Marcus Williams smiled, the first genuinely warm expression any of them had seen from him. "I thought you'd never ask." The demonstration was scheduled for the following Friday. General Hayes attended personally, along with Colonel Price and a handful of other senior officers who had known Marcus by reputation but had never seen him shoot. Torres and his Marines were there too, no longer as subjects of discipline, but as students who had earned the right to witness something extraordinary. The target was placed at 4,200 meters, further than any of them had imagined possible for accurate shooting. It shimmered in the distance like a mirage, barely visible even through high-powered optics. Marcus Williams settled into his shooting position with movements that looked more like a meditation than a military exercise. He checked wind conditions with instruments they barely recognized, made calculations that seemed to take into account factors they hadn't even considered. For a full 3 minutes, he was perfectly still, part of the landscape. A ghost preparing to make himself known. The rifle cracked once, a single sharp report that seemed almost anticlimactic given the build-up. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the spotting scope confirmed what seemed impossible. A perfect center hit at a range that redefined their understanding of what was achievable. The silence that followed wasn't born of shock this time. It was born of reverence. Torres approached Marcus Williams as he secured his rifle, his young face showing a maturity that hadn't been there a month before. "Sir," Torres said, extending his hand, "thank you. For the lesson, for the training, but most of all for showing us what we didn't know we didn't know." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "That's all any of us can do, son. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep remembering that everyone you meet has the potential to teach you something." The transformation was complete. Torres and his Marines hadn't just learned to respect veterans. They had learned to respect the unknown stories that every person carries. The ghost had taught them to see. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, the Williams Protocol had become standard training for all Marines assigned to 29 Palms. What started as discipline for a handful of disrespectful young Marines had evolved into a comprehensive program for veteran recognition and humility training. Sergeant Torres, now bearing the additional responsibility of Assistant Veteran Liaison, stood before a group of newly arrived Marines, sharing the story that had transformed his understanding of service and sacrifice. "The lesson isn't that you should assume every elderly person you meet is a secret military legend," Torres explained to the attentive faces before him. "The lesson is that you should treat everyone with the respect they deserve as human beings, regardless of what you think you know about them." He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, a photograph of Marcus Williams demonstrating proper shooting technique to a group of Marine instructors. "Mr. Williams still comes to the range twice a week. Not because he needs practice, but because he enjoys teaching, and every Marine who works with him comes away better than they were before." The impact extended far beyond a single military base. Word of Marcus Williams and his blue rifle had spread through military circles, creating ripple effects that reached into veteran organizations, military academies, and civilian communities across the country. A documentary film crew had approached Marcus about telling his story, but he had politely declined. "The story isn't about me," he had told them. "It's about learning to see past assumptions and recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary." Instead, he had suggested they focus on other unrecognized veterans, other quiet heroes whose stories deserved to be told. The resulting documentary film, Hidden Service, had won 3 Emmy Awards and led to the establishment of a foundation dedicated to finding and honoring veterans whose contributions had been overlooked or forgotten. The Marcus Williams Foundation, established without his permission but with his grudging acceptance, had identified over 200 veterans in its first year whose extraordinary service had gone unrecognized. Each received not just public acknowledgement, but practical support, medical care, financial assistance, and most importantly, the respect they had always deserved. "I never wanted my name on anything," Marcus had told the Foundation's board during their first meeting. "But if it helps other people get the recognition they've earned, I suppose I can live with the embarrassment." Private Martinez, now Corporal Martinez, and serving as an advanced marksmanship instructor, often shared his own transformation with new students. "I thought I knew what strength looked like," he would tell them. "I thought it was youth and attitude and the latest equipment. I was wrong about all of it. The blue rifle had become something of a legend itself. Requests came regularly from museums and military historians wanting to examine it, study it, understand how a weapon built decades ago could outperform modern systems. Marcus had accommodated a few of these requests, but always with the same condition. The rifle isn't what made the difference. The person behind it is what mattered. Don't lose sight of that. General Hayes had visited the range 1 year after the initial incident, curious to see how the Williams Protocol was affecting her Marines. What she found exceeded her expectations. "The change in culture has been remarkable," she reported to her superiors. "We're seeing increased empathy, better veteran outreach, and significantly improved performance in scenarios requiring cultural sensitivity and situational awareness." But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus Williams himself. The quiet retirement he had maintained for 3 decades had been shattered, replaced by a reluctant but meaningful role as mentor and teacher. 30 years I spent trying to fade into the background," he had confided to Gunnery Sergeant Miller during one of their regular coffee meetings. "Turns out the background isn't where I belonged." The range had become his second home. Young Marines sought him out not just for shooting instruction, but for life advice, career guidance, and perspective on service and sacrifice. He never turned anyone away. "Every question they ask," Marcus explained to a visiting journalist, "is a chance to help them avoid the mistakes I made when I was their age. If my experience can make their service more meaningful or their lives better, then maybe all those classified missions meant something more than I realized at the time." The journalist had asked about the blue rifle, about its history and significance. "The color was practical," Marcus had replied, "but it became symbolic. In a world where everything is painted in camouflage, designed to hide and blend in, sometimes you need something that stands out. Sometimes being visible is more important than being invisible." Torres, now Staff Sergeant Torres, had requested an interview with Marcus for the base newsletter. During their conversation, he asked the question that had been troubling him for months. "Sir, do you ever regret coming to the range that day? If you'd known what would happen, would you have stayed home?" Marcus had considered the question carefully, his pale blue eyes focused on the distant mountains. "Son, I spent 40 years being invisible. 40 years of operations that never happened, in places that don't exist, for reasons that can't be discussed. I convinced myself that invisibility was what I wanted in retirement, too." He paused, watching a group of young Marines practicing on the range under Corporal Martinez's instruction. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the most important mission I ever had was helping a group of young Marines learn that heroes don't always look like what they expect. Maybe visibility, at the right time and for the right reasons, is more valuable than all the invisibility in the world." The final chapter of the story belonged to the Marines themselves. Torres, Martinez, and the others had become ambassadors for the lesson they'd learned, carrying it to every new assignment, every new unit, every interaction with veterans and civilians alike. They had learned to see past appearances, to listen before judging, to recognize that everyone they met carried stories that could teach them something valuable. The ghost had taught them to look for other ghosts. The quiet heroes hiding in plain sight, the extraordinary people disguised as ordinary citizens, the legends walking among them unrecognized and unheralded. And in learning to see others clearly, they had learned to see themselves more clearly, too. Marcus Williams still came to the range twice a week. He still shot his blue rifle with precision that defied explanation. But now he was never alone. There were always young Marines eager to learn, not just about shooting, but about life, service, and the kind of quiet heroism that changes the world without seeking credit. The conversation had come full circle. What started as a confrontation between ignorance and experience had become something much more valuable, a bridge between generations, a transfer of wisdom, and a reminder that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with understanding. To everyone who typed respect and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with veterans like Marcus Williams. Your support helps ensure that no hero remains invisible forever. Subscribe for more stories of quiet courage and hidden valor. See you in the next one.